This episode contains descriptions of sexual assault. If you need help, call 1-800-RESPECT.
Mr. Lehrmann raped Miss Higgins. I hasten to stress this is a finding on the balance of probability.
For the first time, we have a definitive account of what happened on the night Brittany Higgins alleged she was raped by Bruce Lehrmann. It was laid out in painstaking detail by Justice Michael Lee in the Federal Court in Sydney on Monday. It began at the Dock Hotel in Canberra. Friday night drinks where Bruce Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins socialised with friends and colleagues, even a date.
Miss Higgins' hapless state was referred to initially as Bumble Guy, but was later given the dignity of being known by the name Nick.
The date didn't last long.
After being forsaken like a shag on the rock for an extended period and despite making successful attempts to interact with some of the group at the larger table, Nick understandably left the dock, no doubt rueing swiping right.
Justice Lee said by his count, Brittany Higgins consumed 11 drinks over the course of the night, and Lehrmann directly observed at least 6 of those.
He did spend most of the evening with Miss Higgins, and as the night wore on, he was aware of her drinking and towards the end of the evening was encouraging her to drink well beyond the grounds of sobriety.
The judge said Lehrmann purchased several rounds for Higgins and others in the group and found that he had lied to the court about his claim he spent just $40 that night. After hours of chatting, mingling, drinking, tucking away pizza and chips and going to the bar, Justice Lee says a smaller contingent, Higgins, Lehrmann, his friend Austin Wenke and a colleague Lauren Gain, travelled to a karaoke bar called 88 MPH. There, the judge says they had more to drink and the interactions between Lehrmann and Higgins became physical.
One thing did emerge with clarity from the evidence of Ms. Gain, that at 88 MPH, Brittany hooked up with Bruce. Mr. Lehrmann was acting upon his attraction to Miss Higgins, and the less than sober Miss Higgins was sufficiently uninhibited to be a not unwilling participant.
As midnight came and went, a decision was made to leave 88 MPH. Gain and Wenke left in one Uber, and Lehrmann and Higgins in another. The judge did not believe Higgins' claim that she was just a passive participant in this decision to go back to Parliament. This is a critical point. Brittany Higgins said in the witness box she was so compliant with drunkenness that she got into the car with Lehrmann because someone told her he lived in the same direction as her. Lehrmann said everyone left the bar at the same time and he indicated he had to go back to Parliament to get his keys. He said Higgins told him she also needed to go to Parliament and he suggested they share an Uber.
I reject both these accounts. Mr. Lehrmann's account is risible. Miss Higgins was the most junior and recent member of Senator Reynolds' office. What possible reason was there for this heavily intoxicated young woman, who had earlier seen no need to carry her parliamentary pass, to go back to work after a night on the tiles? It is not as if one can readily envisage what work was necessary to be done by a junior media advisor at a ridiculous hour on a Saturday morning.
But they didn't go home. Instead, Lehrmann and Higgins travelled to Parliament House, where he told security guards he was on official duties.
Oh, hi mate. Bruce Lehrmann here with Minister Linda Reynolds. We've been requested to pick up some documents. I've forgotten my pass.
The judge said it was more likely that Lehrmann had told Higgins he wanted to drink whiskey stored at the office. But the true motivation, Lee said, was Lehrmann's desire to have sex with Higgins.
Common sense suggests that it is obvious there was one dominant thought running through the mind of Mr. Lehrmann as he was approaching Parliament House, and it had nothing to do with French submarine contracts. He was a 23-year-old male cheating on his girlfriend, having just hooked up with a woman he found sexually attractive. Human experience suggests that what he then wanted to happen is not exactly shrouded in mystery.
After passing through security and being escorted to Linda Reynolds' ministerial suite by an on-duty guard, they spent some time in a common area before making their way to the former senator's private office together. Justice Lee said they may or may not have drunk the whiskey Lehrmann was so keen to show Higgins. Then, Justice Lee said Lehrmann ignored several calls from his ex-girlfriend while he raped Higgins, who he found was too drunk to consent. Lee said even if Higgins was consenting to kissing and touching earlier in the night, and she agreed to go back to Parliament, maybe even for the purpose of sex, he found that by the time sexual intercourse started, she was not cognitively aware of what was going on.
I'm satisfied that it is more likely than not that Mr. Lehrmann's state of mind was such that he was so intent upon gratification to be indifferent to Miss Higgins' consent, and hence went ahead with sexual intercourse without caring whether she consented. In summary, I consider it more likely than not in those early hours, after a long night of conviviality and drinking, and having successfully brought Miss Higgins back to a secluded place, Mr. Lehrmann was hell-bent on having sex with a woman he A, found sexually attractive, B, had been mutually passionately kissing and touching, C, had encouraged to drink, and D, knew had reduced inhibitions because she was very drunk. In his pursuit of gratification, he did not care one way or the other whether Miss Higgins understood or agreed to what was going on.
The judge said it was important to note that Lehrmann dashed out of the suite at 2:33 a.m, leaving Higgins passed out on a sofa. She was found there naked by security guard Nicola Anderson in the hours that followed. The judge found it unlikely that Higgins had, as she told the Project, repeatedly said no, and more likely that Higgins had been passive during the sexual encounter. Nevertheless, he said her level of drunkenness meant there was no doubt this was rape. Justice Lee pieced this version of events together by wading through weeks of evidence given by 33 witnesses, as well as thousands of documents. And having weighed the competing accounts of Lehrmann and Higgins, he concluded neither was telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
The first is, at bottom, this is a credit case involving two people who are both, in different ways, unreliable historians. Countless scholarly articles have been written seeking to explain the frailties of human memory and why it is that different people may remember the same event in different ways. People give unreliable evidence for various reasons, and distinguishing between a false memory and a lie can often be difficult.
Justice Lee said Bruce Lehrmann deliberately moulded his evidence to present himself in the best light.
To remark that Mr. Lehrmann is a poor witness is an exercise in understatement. As I'll explain, his attachment to the truth was a tenuous one, informed not by faithfulness to his affirmation, but by fashioning his responses in what he perceived to be his forensic interests.
Lee said Lehrmann's reluctance to tell Fiona Brown, who was his boss at the time, what had happened on the night of the assault was evidence of his propensity for lies. The judge's assessment of Brittany Higgins was more complex. He agreed behaviour following the rape was consistent with that of an assault victim, but that she had also lied about certain aspects of her story starting in 2021. This distortion of the truth coincided with the arrival on the scene of David Shiraz, who was Higgins' boyfriend at the time and is now her fiancé.
In the case of Mr. Lehrmann, the untruths were all over the shop, being a form of what might be described as disorganised lying, whereas the untruths of Miss Higgins generally had a common thread. In 2019, this was to paint aspects of her conduct in a better light at a time when she did not wish to pursue a complaint, but by 2021 and afterwards, most were part of a broader narrative or theme that she and her boyfriend wished others to believe, and it appears others wanted to believe.
That broader narrative, that's the idea that the Morrison government conspired to cover up this rape. The judge just does not buy it. Remember, this is how the Project opened its story.
Tonight, claims of rape, roadblocks to a police investigation, and a young woman forced to choose between her career and the pursuit of justice.
By the time Network 10 got to court, it knew it could not prove that there'd been any political cover-up or conspiracy at all. Ten and Wilkinson both tried to argue in court that they had not, in fact, claimed that there was a conspiracy, just that Brittany Higgins believed it to be so. The judge was scathing about this.
In the febrile atmosphere of 2021, many instinctively believe what Ms. Higgins asserted about the rape and the subsequent cover-up of the crime. In advance of any trial where the rape allegation would be examined, the broader allegations of Ms Higgins, resulting her in being feted by many, becoming a celebrated speaker at a mass demonstration, becoming nominated for awards, receiving invitations to make a nationally televised speech at the National Press Club, and a book deal with Penguin Random House apparently worth $325,000.
Higgins also used this claim of victimisation and conspiracy to negotiate a $2.4 million compensation deed with the Commonwealth.
It is evident that several things being alleged were untrue.
The judge did not accept, as Higgins claimed in the Project interview, that she was excluded in the office and indirectly pressured to drop the claim. That's a big moment in this judgment because the Project story triggered a wave of rage against the then Morrison government and Prime Minister Scott Morrison himself about this very claim of a political conspiracy. Thousands of women marched on Parliament to express their anger. But the judge said the thing that they were angry about, the conspiracy, just didn't happen. One of the crucial parts of his reasoning is the evidence of Fiona Brown, who was then Chief of Staff in Linda Reynolds' office. Brittany Higgins told the Project Fiona Brown made her feel like she was a troublemaker for raising the allegation, and that Brown indicated Higgins would no longer have a job if she continued to pursue it. Higgins slated Brown for holding a meeting with her and Senator Reynolds in the office where the rape occurred. Fiona Brown gave emotional evidence that the claim of conspiracy was entirely untrue. She said Higgins didn't at first disclose any sexual encounter, but that when she did, Brown urged her to go to the police and in fact walked her to the AFP office in Parliament House.
Ms Brown struck me as the archetype of a successful professional administrator of a certain age and disposition. One aspect of her evidence was particularly striking. Despite Ms Brown facing sustained pressure from her minister and one of the minister's colleagues to report the incident to the AFP, even though she was then unsure an allegation was being made of rape, and irrespective of the wishes of Ms Higgins, she pushed back. She was not someone to speculate or jump to conclusions, and I reject any suggestion Ms Higgins expressly said to Ms Brown at either their first or second meeting that she had been raped or sexually assaulted.
The judge in fact hailed Fiona Brown as a person of integrity who actually stood up for Higgins. This is a reference to a moment in the weeks after the incident, when Minister Linda Reynolds and the Chief of Staff of another minister, Alex Hawke, became concerned that Higgins was saying sex had occurred but didn't want to go to police. Brown was ordered to go to a police station herself and report the allegation, whether Higgins agreed or not. Brown refused to do so. What the judge said was a moment of courage.
She adopted the more cautious view that sex and something untoward may have happened. But what does not reflect caution was standing up to her minister and the Chief of Staff of another minister when Ms Brown thought that they were intent on protecting their own interests at the expense of allowing a young woman to make her own decision as to whether she would involve the police, even at some risk to her professional career. This showed integrity in resisting pressure she subjectively considered inappropriate and evinced a concern for the autonomy and welfare of Ms Higgins. In these circumstances, to be later vilified as an unfeeling apparatchik willing to throw up roadblocks and covering up criminal conduct at the behest of one's political overlords must be worse than galling.
Coming up, how Network 10 fared in Justice Michael Lee's epic judgment. While I've got you, our subscribers get this kind of detailed analysis every day. Our website has live blogs of major events and political showdowns, and breaking news alerts are sent direct to our subscribers' phones. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after this break. Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson had two defences. First, that the claim of rape was true, and second, that it was reasonable to publish. Early in his judgment, Michael Lee found the reasonableness defence had not been made out. That's a sharp criticism of Ten's journalism. Lee said Ten and Wilkinson failed to do any proper investigation into glaring holes in Higgins' story. He said Ten failed to show curiosity about why the famous bruise photograph, which Higgins provided to them, showed a bruise on her right leg when she claimed the bruise was on the left leg. He said Ten also failed to look into the mystery of how this bruise photo had survived the complete death of Higgins' phone, which, she told them, could have been remotely wiped by the government. The judge said Ten also failed to apply any scrutiny to David Shiraz, Brittany Higgins' then boyfriend, who'd brought them the story. The judge said Shiraz's motivations were manifest, that is, he wanted to harm the government. And Ten not only failed to hesitate at this, but also willingly jumped onto the conspiracy bandwagon.
The motivations of Mr Shiraz in selecting the journalist to tell and use the story were manifest, and rather than this motive being a cause of some degree of circumspection, Mr Llewellyn and Ms Wilkinson indicated their willingness to assist in the political use of the allegations as Ms Higgins and Mr Shiraz intended.
The judge scoffed that Angus Llewellyn, the producer, and Lisa Wilkinson believed the claim by Higgins and Shiraz that politicians had stopped police getting access to the CCTV from the night in question. And he found Ten failed to make real attempts to give Bruce Lehrmann a right of reply.
If Network 10 wanted to get in contact with Mr Lehrmann, there were ways of ensuring that contact could be achieved. He was not living the life of a hermit. He was working for a public relations company in Sydney. This approach lacked reasonableness in the circumstances of the publication of an allegation of such seriousness.
The judge made a special point of criticising the evidence of Lisa Wilkinson. He said she did not help herself in the witness box, arguing with lawyers and trying to make out claims that just weren't backed by evidence, like her refusal to admit that her Logie speech in 2022 was a public endorsement of Brittany Higgins.
And the truth is, this honour belongs to Brittany. It belongs to a 26-year-old woman's unwavering courage. It belongs to a woman who said, enough.
That speech was made just 8 days before Lehrmann's criminal trial and caused a furious ACT Chief Justice Lucy McCallum to delay the trial.
Ms Wilkinson was a Fourth Estate eminence grise of over 40 years' experience. She gave evidence she was appointed a member of the Order of Australia in 2016 for, among other things, service to broadcast and print journalism. If she had thought matters through as an experienced journalist, and less as a champion for Ms Higgins, she ought to have known the speech was fraught with danger and recognised that lauding a complainant on the evening of a rape trial in the terms she did would be apt to undermine the due administration of justice.
To make matters worse, Ten then threw Wilkinson under the bus, taking her off the project and letting her wear the public criticism for the speech, refusing to reveal that it had in fact legaled and approved the speech. Michael Lee was equally unimpressed with Ten's chief litigation counsel, Tasha Smithies, who gave evidence that she still believed the speech was an appropriate way to show support for Brittany Higgins. And he mocked the idea that Lisa Wilkinson's lawyer advanced that Wilkinson had been ordered to make the speech and was reluctant.
Although I regard Ms Wilkinson's conduct giving the speech to be improper and justifiable, she has less culpability than those encouraging her to make the speech. Ms Wilkinson at least had the insight to seek advice and might not be expected to have the objectivity of others within Network 10, given the fact that she had, as Ms Smithies noted, become part of the story.
But speaking outside court, Lisa Wilkinson gave no indication of being humbled by the criticism.
Today, the federal court has found that I published a true story about a rape in a federal minister's office at Parliament House in March of 2019. I sincerely hope that this judgment gives strength to women around the country.
When it was all said and done, Justice Lee said if he had found in Bruce Lehrmann's favour, any aggravated damages he would have awarded would have amounted to $20,000. In other words, Lehrmann's reputation was not worth much. There's much more in that epic judgment, and you can read all the analysis from our team right now by joining our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au.